Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Cedarville Stories podcast. I'm Mark Weinstein, and today on the program, I am continuing my conversation with Jodi Williams and Jerami Cheatwood, two Border Patrol agents serving at the northern and southern borders of the United States. Jodi earned a degree in criminal justice in 2000 and is a Border Patrol agent in charge along the northern border in Maine. Jerami Cheatwood graduated in 1999 with a degree in management, and he serves at the southern border. Let's go now to my conversation with Jodi Williams and Jerami Cheatwood on this week's Cedarville Stories podcast. Jodi and Jerami, thanks for joining me again for another week of podcasts and talking about your role as Border Patrol agents. Last week, we finished the program talking about the perception or reality of border security in the United States. Let me take that question a little deeper, if I may, and ask you, I watch the news a lot, and I saw a lot of stories, mostly from the southern border, and it looked like it was really a tough situation. Did the media portray that accurately, in your opinion?
On the southern border, it was fairly accurate. I think the news goes in cycles, right? So over the past few years, the news cycle would be heavy on the border, and then it would go away because something else would happen. I think the biggest thing that I took away from that is, the news would get off focus of what was going on the border, but we were still dealing with it every day. But it was definitely it's been a difficult few years. A lot of growing and learning and dealing with crisis of how many people we would have in custody. But I think the news portrayed it fairly accurate.
Okay.
Depending on which news agency you were watching as well.
Sure, I'm sure. So, I didn't hear a lot of news coverage out of the northern borders. Why is that?
When you look at the numbers that the southern border was seeing, you have to kind of put it in context for the northern border.
Okay.
We weren't seeing exactly their numbers. However, I have some stats here during fiscal year 23 along the northern border. There was over 10,000 individuals apprehended up here. Well, then in fiscal year 24, there was almost 22,000.
Okay.
So we had a massive uptick here. The numbers don't quite pick up to the southern border, but for the northern border, it was amazing. I mean, we more than doubled. And there was the sector to my west, Swanton sector, their apprehensions even outnumbered some southern border sectors last year.
Okay.
So when you have that kind of traffic on the northern border, and it was making the news, at least up here in New England, Swanton sector was, their apprehensions were they just skyrocketed. And I think they even surpassed El Centro and a few other sectors on the southern border.
Yeah, that's news that at least it didn't seem to hit national news as much as we did hear a lot about the southern border. And speaking of the border and border security, we just came through an election cycle, and that topic was front of center in the minds of a lot of voters. And so I'm curious now. You said there's peaks and valleys, and depends on the administration in the White House that's leading. So in a short period of time since the current Trump administration has come into play, how have the border crossings increased or decreased, both southern and northern?
We don't have any statistics yet, but I can just speak for our sector alone. There was definitely a decrease, and some has picked up a little bit. We're seeing a little more from calls from other agencies and local, state and local agencies within the state. We try to do a good job messaging to the locals here, and honestly, without the local support and them calling us when they see things or notice things, they're a major force multiplier for us up here. But definitely has, statistically, it has seemed to trickle downward for sure.
Is that the same thing down in southern border, Jerami?
Yeah, I can speak for El Centro, and it's been a dramatic decrease. I think we had one person cross yesterday in all of the sector, which is about 70 miles of border, where normally it was 50 to 100. And that's been that way for about a week now. Last week, I think in 7 days, we had about 22 people cross at my station, which we used to get that in a shift or in one group coming across, 20 to 30. So it's decreased quite a bit, but it ebbs and flows. So we'll see what happens in the next few months, but it's definitely decreased here.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jodi.
Oh, just to put that in context too, for the northern border, we generally see a decrease this time of year anyway. January, February, just environmentally, our border gets nearly inaccessible in certain places depending on snow. Yeah. We don't have as much snow this year, so sometimes that does affect. We get cross-border traffic where they just drive across in vehicles. Our infrastructure up here is very limited, and we don't have a fence. We have just trees and roads and not much to separate the two. So we do generally see, and Swanton sector, like I mentioned, they do see a lot of incursions in vehicles. And in the wintertime, it tends to slow down just because of environmental conditions.
Right. One number that I heard was like in the first week of the current administration, border crossings were down 35% in the southern border. And then I've heard even as high as 65% since then. I don't know if those numbers are accurate, but if they are, what's causing that decline in people trying to cross the border illegally? Have you guys done anything different?
So on the southern border, we haven't done anything different. We're still remaining the same posture. We have a very pro-enforcement posture here in El Centro sector. We're out on the border, apprehending everyone who crosses and trying to prosecute to the greatest extent that we can. So we haven't changed our posture. That's a great question on what's changed. I think time will tell what's changed, but yeah.
So earlier in last week's podcast, Jeremy, you mentioned that one of your collateral roles is to serve as a chaplain at the El Centro sector in Southern California. What's involved and what are your experiences as a chaplain? And then on the side note of that is that has to bring like your whole life together, doesn't it? Where you get to bring your faith in Jesus to your daily work. And that has to be very rewarding.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, in reality, as an agent, everyone knew I was a Christian beforehand. So it was just kind of putting a title to the name. And the reason that I became a chaplain wasn't so that I could help more people. Well, it was so I could help more people. It wasn't so that I could help people because I was doing that already. But it was really to put my name out there that, hey, I am a Christian. I'm a chaplain. If you need help, come talk to me. And that's why I became a chaplain. But my daily duties or my normal duties as a chaplain is basically it's a collateral duty. I have my normal duties. It's deputy patrol agent in charge here that I have to deal with. But when someone's struggling or when something happens major and someone needs help, I'm there. So it could be as simple as someone walking into my office and sitting down, shutting the door. Hey, I'm struggling with my marriage. I'm struggling with this. And we can just sit down and talk. Or, hey, I was thinking about going back to church, but I don't think I'm worthy to go back to church. I've had that conversation so many times. To just sit down and talk to them about the love of Jesus and the forgiveness of Christ is great for me. And I put my name out there as a chaplain so that I could have those conversations. And then there's other times where you get what we call activated as a chaplain. Someone passes away or someone is called and said, hey, so-and-so is thinking about killing themselves. Can you go talk to them? Those are more difficult, but that's kind of what it entails, is dropping everything that I'm doing now and just running out the door to go help whoever's in their darkest hour a lot of times and to help them see that light. And obviously Jesus is that light, and it's just pointing them to that.
Yeah. So what's the process to become a chaplain for the Border Patrol, Jeremy?
So you have to do kind of like a memorandum just of interest. And then there's a whole application process, which you have to get a pastor to recommend you. You have to show your plan for endorsement or licensure or ordination, whichever one you can attain. And then the chaplains so the chaplain, you don't have to be one faith, it's all different faiths. So I'm a Christian chaplain here at the Border Patrol. And then we have to go to an academy, which is 2 weeks of basically learning pastoral crisis is the actual course. So dealing with people in crisis, how to deal with them, how to help them just basically we're just holding them together to get them to somebody that is licensed to help them through that situation. So if someone's suicidal or the marriage is falling apart or they're really struggling, we're just going to get them together, make sure they're safe, and then walk them over, get them to someone that can really help them. Because I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not able to do that. But I do point them to Christ because I know Jesus can as well. He's a great counselor as well. But that's kind of our role as chaplain, is just to help. And then as far as the chaplains, another role that we have is we do ceremonies. So I've done funerals. We also do prayers. So a lot of our events will have an invocation and a benediction. And so we get to stand up in front of our fellow agents. I've gotten to do it on TV at headquarters and just do a prayer over the event and bring God into every event that we have. Yeah. So it's kind of a great, fun role to be able to bring God into that type of realm, into the government things.
Jesus is the wonderful counselor. Even though you're not a counselor, he's the wonderful counselor, and he can sustain you. Yeah, that sounds like the process is detailed to become a chaplain, and I'm glad that you have opted to use your gifts that the Lord has given you to serve as a chaplain in addition to being a Border Patrol agent. But there was a time, I think it was, you were in training, Jerami, and maybe you're having second thoughts. You were about ready to quit being a chaplain. What was going on in your life? What was in your, why, what happened? What was going on?
Yeah, so I had gone to the Chaplain Academy. It was in Artesia, New Mexico is where that one was held. We held them all over the place. One of the instructors had got up there and said, hey, he was kind of giving an instruction on how we can pray publicly. Yeah. And he told us that we couldn't pray in the name of Jesus. At that moment, I just basically shut down, let that class be over. I got up, I went to one of the instructors. So the instructor that he was a different religion, he was Mormon, the one that had given that. I went to another instructor that I knew was a Christian. Yeah. And I went to him and I said, hey, I'm going to leave. I can't do this. Everything that I do is in the name of Jesus. How in the world could I not pray in the name of Jesus? And he sat down and talked to me and he said, well, that's kind of his view and his thing. And he put it in the curriculum, but it's actually not a part of the policy. It's not a part of anything that we do. It's just his opinion that he was putting out there, but he had written it in the curriculum. He said what he did is he prayed in the name of Jesus anyways. And I said, I'm not going to get kicked out of being a chaplain or anything like that. He said, no. And so that kind of kept me there. And I'm glad I did because I learned a lot of great tools. And I know I mentioned this earlier, I ended up becoming the national chaplain. Right. So I was in charge of the chaplaincy program. And I got to rewrite the curriculum. And I made sure that wasn't in the curriculum anymore because it wasn't a part of the policy. And that our chaplains weren't even being told not to pray in the name of Jesus. Yeah. So
do you have any restrictions? Are there any restrictions of how you exercise your faith in Jesus as a chaplain?
The only restriction we have is that we can't go and I can't even say that word. We can't go out and preach.
You can't witness.
Yeah, witness. You can't witness from hey, you know what, I'm going to go give a benediction or I'm going to give this, or a lot of times we give talks on how to handle stressful situations or finances or different things. We give trainings. So we can't go out there and just start witnessing for Jesus in that sense. But the way that works is we have great training. So we have we give Dave Ramsey training. We have different trainings on how to deal with just the stresses that law enforcement puts on a marriage and how to deal with that. But when they come to me on a one-to-one basis and they say, how do I live? Or how do you live? Or how do I do this? Part of the policy is, hey, you just tell them how you live. So I get to witness to them on how I live for Jesus and how Jesus transforms my life. So that's one of the only restrictions we have is we can't get up there and say, I'm a Christian, you need to follow Jesus from the pulpit or from the muster room or from the training. Right. But we live that example out. And then when they come to us and talk to us about, because we are a chaplain, we want to figure out who we are, how we live, then we go for it.
So as a chaplain, how much time is devoted to being a chaplain compared to being the deputy border patrol agent in charge? I mean, are you doing your chaplaincy work after, quote unquote, after hours?
So it's not really after hours, and it ebbs and flows. So the higher you go up in the border patrol, so I'm third or fourth level supervisor. It's not really high. There's a lot higher. I'm kind of middle management.
Okay.
The less that the agents are interacting with you because it feels uncomfortable for them to walk in. So my duties as I go up, my chaplain duties go down. But as a supervisor, there was times where, especially as national chaplain, I would spend all of my time doing that, but it wasn't necessarily after hours. So you'll be out in the field doing your normal duties. I can remember I was out patrolling the border. And then there was a synagogue shooting up in San Diego quite a few years ago where the guy came in and there was a border patrol agent who stopped the shooting. He was one of my agents. He called me. I instantly got activated as a chaplain, and I just drove straight to San Diego, went to the church, and just kind of ministered to him and helped him through that process. And that was a long process for him. That was a very traumatic event. But so that one lasted a few days of me just being with him through that process. But so it's kind of that way where it is on duty, but then it becomes a 24-hour. Like you'll sit with a family when their loved one passes away, if they're an agent, and you'll sit with them for days, helping them plan the funeral, do different things like that. So right now, it's like I said, it's lessened, but it just depends on the events that are happening.
A few minutes ago, you talked about mental health and the importance of that. And that led me to think, like, in my role with the Public Relations Society of America, we're often talking about mental health, putting in measures that protect us, to give us the best opportunity to be healthy and do our jobs the best we can. So I would believe being a Border Patrol agent, being a chaplain with the Border Patrol can be really challenging and exhausting. How do you protect yourself from exhaustion, from burnout, from just giving up? Because you're bearing a lot of people's burdens in addition to your main job.
So that's a tough one. Burnout is very real. And I don't know that I'm good at it, protecting myself from burnout. I think the biggest thing I've learned is to say, you know what, I can't handle this one right now. When it would come to a call out as far as the chaplaincy, and we have other chaplains that are available, other peer support, of just knowing when to say, you know what, I'm not in a place to handle this right now. But really, for me, I think the biggest thing, I mean, I'm a part of my church. I'm an elder in my church. I have some men around me that I can just speak to. And when I'm struggling, I can go to them. I can talk to them, and they can pray for me. And to me, that's the biggest thing about protecting myself from burnout, is having that core group of accountability men that I can go to that can pray for me and lift me up. Also, my wife is very integral part of that, when I can go to her and say that I'm struggling. Hey, it's been a rough day. Mentally, I'm done. Spiritually, I'm done. I'm tapped out today. And she can pray for me and help me through that. So burnout is a very real struggle. And I think the biggest thing is, one, recognizing. I was really bad at recognizing it for a couple years there. And then when you're recognizing it, just to handle it and not be afraid to ask for help and say that you need assistance.
That's great advice. To seek friends around us and always seek and pursue the Lord. So my final question to you, Jerami, is this. So when I read your story that we wrote from the Public Relations Department at Cedarville, and talking with you today, my mind goes to Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who love God and called according to his purpose. Back before 2009, you were in the flooring business, and that's where you were going to be. But the Lord closed that door, and it didn't seem like a good thing at the moment. Very difficult, probably. But the Lord turned that into a really good thing in your heart and your mind. Can you speak to how the Lord used that situation, not just to get you into the Border Patrol, but really to transform you more like him?
Yeah, I think I quote that verse to myself all the time, every time I'm in a hard situation. But yeah, I mean, in the middle of, I had 3 kids. In 2009, flooring business was doing okay, but not really. I could see it dwindling. Housing market was crashing. That's a stressful time.
It was.
And I just kind of put my life in God's hands and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Me and my wife didn't know what we were going to do. Getting a job with the Border Patrol was a huge step. It was something that excited me, and praying about it. And it just seemed like that's where God was taking us. And it's been the best thing for my family. It's a great job. Yeah, we've moved around quite a bit here and there, but it's been, God has used it to strengthen not only my family financially, and I guess not strengthened, but how would you say stabilized financially, but really strengthened my relationship with Him, because I've had to be that light in sometimes a dark world. As Jodi alluded or was talking about the academy being a difficult place and a culture shock. Yeah, you're around law enforcement. You're around a pretty rough crew sometimes. There's
Right.
a lot of bad things that happen, not with us, but we're dealing with some bad situations. And God has really used all of that to just strengthen my relationship with Him and solidify my faith even more with Him. But yeah, so God does work all things for the great of those who love Him, for the good of those who love Him. And I wouldn't imagine that God would do this with my life, as far as allowing me to influence people for Him to the extent that I've been able to in the Border Patrol.
So let's go full circle in our conversation with both podcasts. And Jodi, you knew that you wanted to be in law enforcement when you came to Cedarville, pretty much. I mean, you had some learning to do, but you knew kind of the direction you're headed. Nearly 25 years later, you're still doing this job. What brings you greatest satisfaction? And I assume you have no regrets that you chose, or the Lord chose for you, Border Patrol work.
Yeah, absolutely no regrets. I tell people often, like, it is still the best job I can think of. God opened the right doors for me. I mean, like I said, it took me only 6 months to go from application to be at the academy, 7 months. For a lot of people, that's over a year process. I mean, right there, total door open. Went through the academy. As Jeremy alluded to, it is a very difficult academy. I only accredit Cedarville to instilling in me like that discipline, whether it was just through sports or through my schoolwork.
Yeah.
Having discipline to make it through that academy. I mean, you're talking about culture shock, Jeremy. I went from a Christian college to a month later right into the Border Patrol Academy. So it was major culture shock. And then a Maine kid graduating from Ohio and then going to Arizona was another major culture shock for me. And just having that discipline, having that knowledge and just that belief to just rely on God, like knowing that everything would be okay. And, I had wanted to come home for sure. And it just was not happening for the first 4 or 5 years of my career. And then you talk about just like the right doors opening, and God opened the right door at the right time. And we were able to come home. I had gotten married at the time in Arizona, somebody from Arizona, and he actually wanted to move to Maine. So that was also a bonus. And just everything worked out. I mean, it was a total God plan. And I still love it. I still love coming here. Yeah, July will be my 25 years. And I love this job. Being able to be here, like in my hometown, and working with these people, they're not just my employees. Like, these are people I truly care about. These are people I am invested in their lives. Jeremy's a chaplain. I'm a peer support member. So very similar roles, very similar coming in either in a crisis or being activated for a crisis or just being here. I have to wear multiple hats sometimes, Jeremy as well. Okay, I'm taking off my patrol agent charge hat, and this is peer support time, and really just being there for these people and whatever they might need, or in sickness or hospitalizations and stuff like that. So it is truly something I've invested my life in, and I would not change a thing, to be honest.
That's great. And we're glad you're serving in the role you're doing. Final question for you, Jodi. You get the final word on the podcast. So when people are listening and watching this podcast, maybe they're a prospective student, maybe they're a parent of a prospective student, and they know their student is interested in law enforcement. What factors should they look at when they're looking for a college, looking for a program, or just trying to prepare themselves for what you are doing professionally? What advice do you have for them?
So, I mean, college is not required to get into the Border Patrol, but I would strongly recommend anyone to do it. Like I said, it's that foundation of discipline and developing those study habits to go into the Border Patrol Academy, and then having the discipline to go about this job. It is very difficult. And having a faith-based education gives you the foundation as well to make it through those days. And criminal justice, for me, it just kind of solidified, the path that I wanted to go. And we're always hiring. I can say always. Occasionally, there's times we're not, but absolutely for someone who loves the outdoors and is adventurous, willing to move anywhere, it really is. It can't be beat. I don't know how to say that any better. Maybe Jeremy can.
Well, Jodi and Jeremy, I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. Love following your stories as little as I have in the recent days, and it sounds compelling and inspiring. And I encourage our listeners and viewers to, when they think of it, to pray for our Border Patrol agents, you specifically, but also the agents in general, because you guys are on the front lines serving our country, trying to keep us safe. And I thank you for your service. And I'm really thankful that you both are Cedarville University graduates. Thanks for joining me this week on the Cedarville Stories podcast.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. Be sure to come back next week when we'll share another Cedarville story for God's glory.